Hello everyone, this is Dr. Jenkins. We are already here with lab number 4, which involves some directional terms, terminology, and then of course there is the rat dissection. Won't be the same without being in person, but we'll do our best, okay? All right, so as always, I like to, let me use green maybe. As always, I like to do a little video just to introduce some of the most important concepts, all right? Part 1 of this lab is involving some terms for orientation of the body and directional terms. I'm pretty sure that you had this in lecture, but one of the good things about lab, even if it's virtual, is that we get an opportunity to go over things again. And the more we can go over things, the more likely it's going to stick in our brains. So make sure you review the planes of the body, all right? I've put in red, in this week's lab, you'll see whatever is in red is what you are responsible for knowing. So make sure you review the planes of the body, okay? The sagittal plane is an imaginary plane that divides the body into right and left halves. The frontal plane, as the name suggests, is an imaginary plane that divides our body into front and back halves. And that leaves the transverse plane, which divides our body into top and bottom halves. I've given you a link. This one isn't a video, but it's a good website to show you some more explanations and pictures. Then you're going to review some directional terms, and you can read here why it's important. It's important that we have a common language. And when we talk about these directional terms, everything is referenced from anatomical position. And you can see this dude here to our right is in anatomical position. But the important thing is the forearm and the hand. In anatomical position, your body is facing forward. But if you think about your palms, your hand and your forearms, you can either face your palm towards the back or you can face your palm towards the front. And anatomical position means that we face our palms towards the front. So if we're saying the front of the body, that means the front of the palms. The front of the hand is the palm. And then you're going to review some of these directional terms. There are many, many more, but we're asking you to know some. Let's first talk about superior and inferior. One way to maybe go through this would be if you could substitute another word. So for example, another way that we could say superior and inferior would be up and down. Actually, let's go with higher or lower. I think that might be better. So superior really means higher, and inferior really means lower. Okay, so if something is said to be superior in the body, it's more towards the head, it's higher. If something is said to be inferior in the body, it is more towards the feet or it is lower. So if you're having a hard time with these, you could just substitute that word. Higher, superior. Lower, inferior. Anterior and posterior. Anterior means front, and posterior means back. So if anything is on the anterior side of the body, it is on the front of the body. Palm, front. If anything is said to be posterior, it is on the back of the body. And guess what? Ventral and dorsal are other words that mean the same thing. So ventral and anterior mean the same thing. If something is ventral, it's anterior. We tend to use ventral and dorsal more on our four-legged friends, our animal friends, but really we could use either. And that means that posterior and dorsal both mean the back. The way that I remember dorsal is to think of like a dorsal fin on a dolphin. The dorsal fin is on the back of the dolphin, isn't it? Medial and lateral. Medial, you could almost think of this as inside and lateral as outside. When we're talking about medial and lateral, it's always in reference to the midline. So if we draw an imaginary line down the center of the body, if something is medial, it's closer to the midline. Whereas if something is lateral, it's further away from the midline. Okay, so medial, lateral, closer to the midline, inside. And again, these little keywords that I'm giving you don't necessarily always mean the same thing, but if you're having a hard time learning, that's a way to start. Medial means closer to the midline. Lateral means further away from the midline. Superficial and deep, I don't think I need to go into detail with that. Superficial just means more towards the surface of the skin. Deep means deep, deeper towards the core. And then we have proximal and distal. These are a little bit tougher. With proximal and distal, excuse me, proximal and distal, we're almost always talking about the limbs. So we're talking about arms and legs. If something is said to be proximal, it's closer to the point of attachment. So think about the arm here. If something is proximal, it's closer to the point of attachment. If something is distal, it's further away from the point of attachment. And these would stay, even if this person raised his arm up into the air, the proximal and distal definitions would still be the same. Either closer to the point of attachment, proximal, or further away from the point of attachment, distal. All right, and you're gonna use this information to answer the questions on the lab assignment, right? Yes, you are. The next thing here is that we're reviewing the cavities of the body. So in its simplest form, we have two cavities, ventral, which is the front cavity or anterior, and dorsal, which is the back cavity. Okay, so you can see in this picture down here, ventral's referring to the front, and then dorsal is referring to the back. And these cavities are what house our organs, and we have subdivisions. So with the ventral cavity, which is the front, the anterior cavity, we have a thoracic cavity, that's where our heart and lungs are, and then our abdominal cavity, further down, further inferior, which houses our digestive organs, reproductive organs, urinary organs. Notice that it is the diaphragm that separates them, right? So the diaphragm, this red arch, that's the physical structure that separates the thoracic from the abdominal cavity or abdominopelvic cavity. On the back side, we have, on the dorsal cavity, we have the cranial cavity. Guess what? Houses the brain. And then we have the spinal cavity. Guess what that houses? Spinal cord. So make sure you know what these cavities are, and make sure that you can list some organs that are in each. Now, when we get to the abdomen, there's so many organs going on that it's helpful to have a system. And one of the easiest systems is the 4 abdominal quadrants. So we can have an imaginary lines that create 4 quadrants in a human. Now pay attention here. I make a note. These are named by what it would be on that person. So this is the right side and this is the left, because that's what would be that person's right or left. Even though as we're looking at it, it looks like it's opposite, but we name right and left by what it would be on that person. The belly button, I wrote it down here. The belly button is what serves as our dividing line. So from the belly button, we can make a horizontal line to make upper and lower quadrants. And we can also make a midline, a vertical line, to come up with right and left. You can see the organs that are the major organs that are in each one. Let's go through and label them together. Let's use purple. On the upper right quadrant, we have the liver. The liver is this big, huge organ. That whole thing is the liver. Isn't that crazy? Okay, and then on the underside of the liver is this little green thing, I just made it purple, called the gallbladder. If I erase it, you'll see it again. There's a little pale green guy, the gallbladder. So upper right quadrant, liver and gallbladder. Upper left quadrant, we have the stomach, which is shown here. That's our stomach. And then it's kind of hard to see here, but the spleen comes around on the side like this. So the two S's, upper left quadrant, stomach and spleen. Now, the pancreas is kind of an interesting one because the pancreas is behind the stomach. And it's listed here as being mostly on the upper left, even though a little bit of it goes to the upper right. So what I'm coloring here in orange is where the pancreas is, mostly on the upper left. Maybe a bit of it comes to the upper right, but it's behind the stomach. Good stuff we're learning here, right? This is stuff that, in all seriousness, no matter what you go on to do, this is helpful to know. We have the small intestine, which is smaller in diameter. So all this is small intestine, smaller in diameter. Whereas the large intestine, I have an orange, it's wider, kind of goes up and around. So the orange here is the large intestine. And then the inner part that I have in purple is the small intestine. Goes by the diameter, not the length. And lastly, almost lastly, we have the appendix. The appendix is a little doohickey that comes off of the large intestine, lower right quadrant. Lastly, we have the bladder, which we can see part of right here. Bladder. All right, good stuff, everyone. Now you're going to watch the video down here for the rat dissection. Okay. And then I've given you a list of organs that you need to be able to label on the rat. And also there are some reproductive organs for the rat as well, male and female. And I've got a bunch of pictures here to help you. These pictures sometimes have more than you need to know, okay? But it has at least what you need to know. So let's just talk about some of them quickly. Here we have a picture of the rat's thoracic cavity. We have the lungs on either side. There's a lung, and then there will be a lung on the other side, it's just hidden. And then right here in the center is the heart. And then of course you're going to be responsible for the windpipe or the trachea. When we get to the abdominal pelvic organs, they are identified very similarly to what they are in the human. So our upper right quadrant, we have the liver, right? This whole thing is the liver. The gallbladder, it is there, but it's kind of hard to see. So if I was going to ask you the gallbladder, it would just be right underneath the liver. This one shows you the stomach. It's more on the upper left side. This is not a great picture of the pancreas. It would be behind the stomach, but it's not a great picture. Let's see. So the stomach is right here, and the spleen would be right there. Okay, upper left, stomach on top, more lateral is the spleen. Of course, the small and large intestine, let's go with purple. This would be the small, and then the large is a darker color here because it's wider in diameter. I know sometimes when you see this, you might automatically get intimidated, but if you can just, even if you imagine our 4 quadrants, it can help you to think about these organs, okay? The bladder is going to be lower, and it's going to be a little ball-looking thing. There's the bladder. Now, when it comes to the reproductive organs, you don't need to know everything. Before we go on to the reproductive organs, I do want to point out on this picture on the top, this is a great view of the stomach and the spleen. The stomach here is more pink, and the spleen is going to be dark red. So here's the spleen, dark red. So another good look at the spleen and the stomach. For the female reproductive system, you're going to see these 2 little tubes coming down. All right? Each tube is called a fallopian tube or a uterine tube. How do I have it on them? Let me just check my list. Oh, I don't even have it on there. You don't have to know it. Uterus, vagina, and ovary. Let's talk about it. The uterus, actually, this is not a good label. We don't like that. That's the uterine tube. The uterus is where these 2 little pieces of the V come together. So the uterus would be right where they come together. And then at the top of each of those is a little ball. So at the top of the V is a little ball called the ovary. So for the female reproductive system, we have a V. At the bottom of the V, where it comes together, is the uterus. And at the top of each one is an ovary. The vagina is going to be a more of an external, and you can just see it's going to be the middle circle, right? So the most superior is the urinary opening, the middle is the vaginal opening, and then the most inferior would be the anus. For the males, let's see, testes, penis, and vas deferens, the naughty bits. So for the male, the penis looks like a penis, doesn't it? So the penis is going to be kind of what looks like a penis. The testes, we have 2. There's one here, and there's one here. Just like human males, these are on the exterior of the body. One of the differences, though, is that they're proportionately bigger than they are in humans. So here's a picture of the external anatomy. Look at the testes. Here's one testy, and then here's another. They hang outside the male, but they're proportionately really big. Can you imagine if it was the same proportion in humans? The male testes would be dragging on the ground. And the last thing we have would be, just make sure I have the right list, the vas deferens. The vas deferens are the tubes that come up from the testes. There's not a good look at the other testy, but there will be a tube coming up. So the tubes, because what they do is they carry sperm, right? They carry sperm from the testes back up and eventually into the penis. But the vas deferens are the tubes coming up from the testes. Okay, everyone, good luck on this one. Labeling major organs and directional terms and planes. You can do it.